but we'll try not to be too shocking. But we will try to be educational and informative. And so if you have questions as we go, feel free to ask them. I will tell you that I'm going to talk about it from the hotel standpoint in terms of some of the facts and issues that face hotels. And I'm going to rely on the contract lawyer, Steve Rudner, to talk about things you can do to avoid liability or issues or factors you ought to be considering in that regard. And I will tell you, I'm a very good contract lawyer, very good hotel lawyer, but I take all my contract questions to Steve Rudner. So you're in very, very good hands. I will tell you the things that they've asked us to cover. What we're going to cover today is what happens in a slip and fall injury. Who's liable? What is your culpability, the culpability of the hotel, and what's the likelihood of a judgment or problem? Bus transportation between different functions. When you arrange some sort of amenity or service, what is your liability when you undertake that service? We're going to talk about that. Alcohol-related injuries. And I brought some wine just to do a test. Somebody goes to your function, gets inebriated. Maybe they were the last drink, maybe they were the majority of the drinks served at your function. What's your liability in those situations? And then finally, how do you plan and mitigate that liability? Sound like facts come out that the ice machine malfunctioned. The water was out because there was a mechanical failure of the ice machine. No fault of my own, I wasn't drunk. There was no culpability on my part in terms of anything I had done that was intentional or inappropriate. It's your event at the Embassy Suites. The meeting planners have offered this event. I'm staying at the convention hotel. Is there culpability for the hotel? That's first, and let's take them both, hotel and the meeting planner or the event organizer.
Everybody's going to get sued, and that's a function of the society in which we live. There's a vast gap between whether you're liable and responsible for something and whether you're going to be sued. And today, if someone is injured at a function, they're going to sue everybody that they can think of who has any money possibly to give them at all, or at least threaten to sue everybody. So I agree with all of you who raised your hand that a claim will be brought both against the event organizer or the organization that was holding the event, probably not personally against the event organizer, and also against the hotel. There is a tremendous gap between who will be sued and who's ultimately liable. And in this instance, the law actually protects you in a way that perhaps you don't realize that it protects you. In terms of the hotel's liability, the hotel is not an absolute guarantor that nothing bad will happen to you when you set foot on the premises, and neither is the event host or the event organizer. In order for there to be a claim of liability against anybody in that circumstance, there has to be negligence. So, for example, and the ifs are what make the decision here. If the hotel knew that there was a leak, if the hotel failed to clean up the leak, if the hotel failed to warn someone or put up a sign that said, "Don't step here, there's a leak," if the hotel did any of those sort of things, then the hotel would be negligent. The duty is to exercise ordinary or reasonable care. And that's really the question. Did the hotel in that circumstance do what a reasonable person would do? Well, if the hotel didn't know that there had been a leak, and if the leak, let's assume that the leak had just started that day. If there had been a leak and the hotel didn't know there was a leak, but the leak had been there for 3 weeks so that the hotel should have known there was a leak, maybe the hotel has liability. Let's assume that the leak just started and the hotel didn't have any way of knowing, and when it did its check of the whole premises, the leak wasn't happening at that time, so it was a surprise to everyone. Well, the hotel would not have known in that circumstance that anything was amiss, and so therefore the hotel most likely would not have liability. I think it's almost certain in that instance, it's much more certain that the organization holding the event would not have any ultimate liability.
Now let me play a role here, Steve. I'm going to turn around, and when I turn around, I turn into a plaintiff's lawyer. Okay? Do you see the horns? Do you see how my suit suddenly got $1,000 more expensive? And so did your bill? All right. I'm the plaintiff's lawyer, and thinking about what Steve just said, and everything he said is so right on, except in the case of my client. Who are the first group of people I'm going to interview? When I'm going to try to, as a plaintiff's lawyer, to try to say, now remember, my client slipped, fell, broke his back, or broke his hip, and his back, He does not want to go back to work. He's going to watch Oprah all day long until she loses all that damn weight. Okay? He's going to be there to support her because he felt, because of that ice machine, it wasn't his fault. Obviously, it's the fault of the hotel because that ice machine failed. And when I go there, that's an amenity I should reasonably be able to take advantage. I'm Scott Joslove, and I'm president of the Texas Hotel Association. We just did a session on liability. And it talked about shocking truths that you need to learn, but actually there's nothing shocking. You are not the insurer against all bad. And I had my friend who's not with me today, Steve Rudner, who talked about things you can do to avoid liability, and we talked about when you might be liable and ways to mitigate that liability. We talked about taking reasonable care. That means doing the due diligence that you need to do for every event. If you're an off-site event, if you're an on-site event, what to do with alcohol situations, and what is your liability when you are the last server of that drink and then someone may be inebriated. So we covered all those topics, and I hope you get to watch the videography.